Okay, we are live right now. I'm waiting for a couple of seconds till everyone is getting into the room. All right. Okay. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for being here and welcome to our In Search of Soul session, the second and the final webinar in our Quick Decoding series. My name is Tim Nguyen. I'm a product and innovation manager at EMEA, and I'll be your host today. I'm joined with Annelies Verhege. She's our head of innovation at EMEA, and she will be sharing her insights on reimagining qualitative research. So together, we will explore the latest developments in AI and how to both generate and use synthetic data in research and how leading brands are using systems to stay ahead of the curve. So we are incredibly excited to take you through this fascinating story. Um, Before we dive in, though, just a few quick practical notes. So the session is being recorded and you'll receive the recording shortly after we wrap up. If you have any questions during the session, please use the questions tab, which should be somewhere on the right-hand side for you. Um, you can also upvote questions and react using emojis. If you have any comments or just fun reactions, feel free to use the chat as well. And with that, let's get started. I'll hand over to Annelies.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining also on my behalf. So, indeed, today I'm going to take you through a story on synthetic data, and I would like to start by showing you the following example. What you see on the screen here are two quotes from people that have been taking part in qualitative research, like two verbatims that we got out of them. They're all about toothpaste, and I would like to invite you to just read them a bit and make up your mind. Like, what do you think of the quality of those posts? If you would get that type of answer, let's say in qualitative research, would you be satisfied? Do you think it has depth? Would you rely maybe on this to make decisions or to do recommendations? The participants here are talking about toothpaste. So they're first talking about the current brand of toothpaste that they are using. And actually, then the second part is like a bit of an example of what they were saying about like a new brand they would like to consider. So just take few moments to get a bit of a feel of what they try and think for yourself how would you evaluate that type of response. Give it a few seconds. And indeed, don't be shy to also use the chat and react in any way. Okay. Now, what if I would say that actually only one of these answers is coming from a real participant? The other one is actually the result of synthetic data that we have generated. I will show you both of them again, and I would like to see if you can actually figure out which quote is coming from a real person and which quote is coming from a synthetic person. So everybody that thinks that participant A is real, please use the emoji and gives a thumbs up. If you think participant B is coming from a real participant and so not synthetic data, please use the emoji, which is showing like, yeah, I don't know, the party one. Okay, I see a lot of A. Okay, some people think more B. I see some mixed feelings. Okay, so I think you would all agree that, first of all, it is not so easy to distinguish real versus synthetic, right? I think one of the core characteristics of generative AI is that, it's very believable what is generating. If you're looking at it, it looks really real. The question, however, is, of course, is it really real? Um, would it represent human complexity? Does it have all the dimensions you expect in that deep qualitative research? And also, um, would you rely on synthetic data to make decisions on? It's not because it looks real that actually it might be reliable. And this is exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to try together to give some answers on these questions. And I've prepared a small agenda. So the first thing I'd like to do is to take you through some of the principles on generative AI, a little bit on the psychology of generative AI. That's how I like to call it. And I'm doing that specifically because I think if you really maybe understand some of the principles behind it, it's much easier to make up your mind yourself on what you think about synthetic data and what's important. Second one is we're going to go through some approaches to generate synthetic data, specifically with a focus on qualitative research. And then last but not least, I'll round off with some practical things you can already do today. So I would say, let's get started. So starting off with generative AI, I would like to introduce a metaphor on how AI exactly works. It's a metaphor, so it means that I'm making a bit more abstract. It's not, yeah, of course, all the details. The reality is much more complex than what I will tell about. But how I like to think about it is that if you think about generative AI, enhanced large language models, that these large language models, it's typically trained on data that come either from the internet or actually coming from social medias. And how that works, that training, is at the end of the training, they're kind of mapping all the concepts and knowledge present in this training's data into relationship with each other. That's basically what's in your large language model that are your training data. And I see that a little bit as the landscape. Now, here comes my metaphor. If you think about somebody that would be jumping out of a parachute, and that's then your prompt, actually, what would happen is the follow. Based on the words that are used in the prompt, actually, the parachute would land, and it would land actually in the trainings data closest to the concepts used in the prompt. So take this example. I say on Sunday, my kids will. The word Sunday and the word kids are very prominent in that prompt. So actually, it would look in the training data. We have concept close to park, picnic, friend in the neighborhood. So if I would ask the large language model, hey, please complete the sentence on Sunday, my kids will, it would say play in the park and have a picnic with their friends, right? Let's adapt that. Imagine that I say the same question, so the same task, please kind of complete this sentence, but I add kids in Belgium, right? So I add the word Belgium. Now, what would happen in this case is that Belgium in many trainings data is linked to, let's say, waffles. So if I would ask, and kids and waffles, I think that's a good combination as well. So if I would ask to the training data then or large language model complete this sentence just by adding that one word, it would say that yes, kids in Belgium are still going to go to the park with their friends. They're going to have a picnic, but they will also indulge some Belgian waffles. Giving you an example, let's say I do the same for France. France, of course, we think Paris. Paris, we think museums. A popular activity for kids in Paris is to ride your bike along the Seine. So in that case, to complete the sentence, it would say, hey, they would still have a picnic in the park, maybe also visit a local museum and do a bike ride along the Seine. I think you'll get the principle. I just want to wrap up with a last example. In this case, I'm exactly asking the same, but this time in Dutch. So I say op zondag zullen mijn kinderen. So on Sunday my kids will. But just the change of words that I'm using makes that other kind of things are triggered in the large language model. And in this case, the advice is actually that on Sunday my kids will not be in a park. No, no, they will stay home to play together and watch a movie. So you see, actually, and I think that's the conclusion I definitely want to reach, that AI is actually not intelligence, although we talk about artificial intelligence. It's not intelligence, it's just really good at matching patterns. Your results will depend on two things, and this will, of course, be super important in the area of synthetic data. It will depend on your landscape, which is existing out of the training data. And those training data, what it has been trained on, will have quite a big impact on the results. I'll show you here this graph. It's actually coming out of research that was done by Harvard University. And what they did is they looked at basically the correlation between what people say in real life in a certain country versus what ChatGPT would predict. And what you can see is that there's a very strong correlation between the culture and the extent to what extent yeah, basically GPT is correct at kind of predicting what a human would say. This is of course because yeah, what you can see in United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, like more English cultures, Great Britain, there's a stronger correlation. And that is of course because a lot of the training data that have been used in this kind of large language model are trained based on the internet. And on the internet, there are lots of course, conversation in English dominantly, but also there's a lot of skew maybe to the US and these type of cultures. So just to explain that, yeah, actually your underlying training data has a big impact on the outcome of your synthetic data. And of course, yeah, if you create synthetic data, that's something you really need to take into account. The second element to keep in mind is that the result, of course, depends also a lot over your prompts. I gave you the example with the parachute and everything that's related to that. I will not talk today about how to make a good prompt. Here are some examples of yeah, elements you can decide or not decide and to include in your prompt, but just yeah, I think illustrating the importance. It's, by the way, not only your prompt, it's also the order in which you have been prompting. So how these large language models work is they have a context window and they actually take previous prompt information and answers into account. I'll give you this example. Imagine that I say, can you tell me about Java? And right before I had a conversation with my AI system and I was talking about summer holidays and destinations. And then I just asked, can you tell me Java? Actually, it will say Java is an island in Indonesia, which is known for rich cultures, landscapes, and so on. But then if I compare that with a similar prompt, so exactly the same prompt, but right before I've been chatting with AI and I've been asking maybe some tips for an upcoming hackathon on AI, let's say we've been organizing. Well, in that case, if I still ask them about telling about Java, you will see that it will give another answer and it will talk about the fact that this is a programming language, just to illustrate that it is not just the prompt, it's also all the prompts that you have actually used in your context window right before. So your entire session has an impact. Again, something really important in generating synthetic data. So now I hope that we are all, I would say, a bit on the same page how this kind of generative AI models work and what are very important variables. It's time to look a bit closer now at synthetic data. And I would say the whole area of synthetic data is quite, yeah, I think as we all would know and agree on, booming. There's a lot going on. And I think it's important to start this session by just maybe sketching a little bit the landscape of synthetic data. And from our point of view, there's three big categories of synthetic data. There is the first category, and that's actually a category which is not new at all, which I call the augmented synthetic data. It basically means that you have an existing data set and you're generating new data, you're simulating new answers to complement that existing data set. The most classic and known example is actually weighting of quantitative data, right? Because there, it's a technique we have been using all along, and that's typically something you use to simulate answers you haven't asked to real people, to fill in hard to reach target groups, or maybe to amplify voices of underrepresented groups. So that's the first, I would say, category. Something, as I said, so a category where there's like a variation of techniques. There's the more traditional ones like weighting, some statistical techniques. There's more traditional machine learning. But of course, now also with generative AI, there's some new possibilities here in this world. Typically, synthetic data, I would say that living more in the area of quantitative research. There's also another category, and I see that one a little bit at the other side of the spectrum, and I call this the fully synthetic data. Sometimes, if you read about it, you'll also hear the term wholly synthetic data. And here, I would say the big distinction is that there's no existing data set that you're complementing. It's really an entirely new data set that you're creating. So a completely new study you're setting up, you're not using or you're not adding to anything. And what's typically here is that there's no link to real individual people. So there's no link anymore to an existing real human being in the back. It could be a theoretical model that you're using, marketing model, for example. Again, something which is, I would say, popping up quite more and more into quantitative research, a little bit in qualitative research as well. So that's like the fully synthetic data. And then the last category, and to be fair, this is the category we're going to deep dive in today. That's also, I think, where Humanate is, I think, most strong and most, I would say, interested in as a company. That's all about synthetic personas and virtual audiences. How does it compare to the other ones? So it is still the case that in this situation, you're generating completely new data. So you're not just adding to an existing data set, it's a completely new study that you're setting up, but you're still using data from real people as a base. So there's a direct correlation with real individual humans and what they have said in the past, basically. So that's what we're going to talk about a bit more in depth. And actually, in this category, there's two type of big, let's say, methodologies that are surfacing. The first one, I call it the AI avatars. And basically, it means that you're going to simulate new data by looking at different segments or personas representing your population. And based on these personas, you're going to create like an AI avatar or an AI persona. There's different terminologies used for it. And basically, you simulate how this group is going to behave, what kind of needs they have, what kind of experiences, and so on. So it's really on a group level. I'll give you an example, very concrete one. As you might know, so Humanate did few, I think, months ago now by now, a study on silvers, like the silver generation, and what type of like personas you have within that generation. And I think, from that study, there was quite a bunch of personas that arise. We had, for example, the energetic explorers, we had the ambitious adapters, we had the vibrant visionary, and so on. So in this study, we created, as I said, different personas. And for example, what you could do is from these personas, you could create an AI avatar. Now, what does that mean? Basically, we're going to represent, in this case, it's Nicole that I have picked. We're going to take her profile and turn that into an AI avatar that we can use actually in two ways. A first way, and that's the way that you see here already happening on the screen, is basically just to bring the results to life from the existing study. So we did this big segmentation study, and actually we're using those data to interact with Nicole and to kind of socialize the results of the study and like what Nicole is standing for to people interested in these results. So we're asking questions about how she is, what she likes doing, and so on. That is not yet synthetic data. We're just bringing results to life. However, as you can see now, at a certain moment, I can also decide to ask questions that were not represented in the study to Nicole. So here I'm asking her about her beauty. And even in this movie, I am showing her, for example, a new concept board, something that she never, for nobody, no real participant saw ever before. And I say like, hey, I'm going to show you this concept board. Can you please let me know what you like about it, give me feedback on it, and so on. And this is an example how AI avatars or AI personas, how they're sometimes also called, can be used as a way actually to generate synthetic data. So going back to maybe the psychology of AI, like I called it in the beginning, to this original metaphor, what actually happens is in the back of Nicole, we have written a really detailed prompt and description representing Nicole. And actually, how the simulation happens is based on that profile. The large language model will say, okay, what typically people do or talk about in this area actually yeah, that is how she would react, and it's matching patterns, and that's how the simulation is happening for this AI avatar. And of course, again, it depends on your prompt and your training data. So that's the first, I would say, methodology. Then moving maybe to the newest thing in this area, which are digital twins. What's the main difference? Well, you can see it a little bit in the image that I'm showing here. So in AI avatars, we're basically creating synthetic data based on personas and groups, segments. Whereas for digital twins, we're really going to individuals. So the core idea is that for every individual that you would have normally, let's say in your normal samples, you create a AI equivalent, which is called the digital twin. What you then do is you run all the data or all the questions for your digital twins, but similarly, like you take a sample, similarly like you would do like in traditional research, and you aggregate the data, and that's how you're getting your new data set. Digital twins as avatars have real people as a base. Now, digital twins, it's a method where there is a lot of buzz about recently. And there is, I would say, a couple of reasons for it. But one of the reasons for it is that actually Stanford University published a paper not so long ago where they have proven an 85% correlation between real human responses and synthetic data coming from digital twins. So a very high correlation, which might make you wonder, like, okay, will this maybe replace research, or what's then the future of primary, and so on. Now, what is interesting, or what I think is most interesting about this study, and maybe often not so much said, is how they reached that result. And actually, if you deep dive in the answers, it's quite an interesting paper because they compared different types of methods to generate digital twins. And they found that this high correlation is actually only obtained based on really rich data coming from in depth interviews with real people. So it's really rich qualitative data that gives a very good, I would say, base for yeah, your synthetic data. Um, Another study, I think, which is confirming things, and what I'm saying here, if we would talk probably in a few weeks, month, things can be already taking, I think, different twists, because yeah, there's lots happening in this space. So these have the Stanford study, and then I think there's also a whole bunch of new studies, mainly coming also into political research, so more like polling, etc., that show the same on the qualitative data, but also stress a lot the importance of longitudinal qualitative data, and that is really making the difference. I think the core idea is that I always compare it a bit with like playing theater. If you have a digital twin, you have to create that twin in such a way that it stays within the character, it understands, you know, all the details and backgrounds of the person it needs to simulate data on. And the best way to do that is to make sure it's consistent if this is actually one person longitudinal who has as a base for one digital twin. So that background story is really solid and consistent. So longitudinal data, qualitative data seem to be yeah, one of the key directions to make those digital twins work. So I promised you, yeah, three parts in this presentation. We talked about generative AI, the two or the landscape of synthetic research and synthetic data, and then actually the middle area we focused on the virtual audiences and synthetic personas and two techniques, leaving me also with maybe some yeah, guidelines you can consider in getting started. Now, I do, of course, know and realize that the whole area of synthetic data is quite new, and maybe not everybody is ready for that, right? Not in insights and I would say marketing consultancy, but also, of course, yeah, I think in the wider organization, yeah, other different interests can happen also. For example, in the domain of marketing, there's also a lot to do with digital twins and so on. So that's why I thought of preparing kind of two directions. I think some maybe things you can take into account if you're still orienting yourself, but you're not quite ready for it. And then maybe some advice for people that want to try some things out with synthetic data. So if you're still orienting yourself, what would be for me a really good starting point is maybe to consider not to generate or to use AI to generate synthetic data, but actually to use AI just on your existing data. I think the idea behind it is like, why would you generate new simulate new synthetic data if maybe, and I think that's the case for all of us, you're sitting on so much existing data, and AI can also be, without using any synthetic research, a really good, I would say, way to kind of leverage what you already know or not know out of this existing data. I'll show you one example. This is some work we did on cruises. What you can see here, I know it's a bit small, but it's basically a typical customer journey. And actually, all of this content was generated purely with existing data, also using AI. And that's, of course, one of the big powers I think generative AI is giving us. It's the ability to much easier than before actually recycle existing data. And that's also my recommendation. If, yeah, we think about simulating data, why not just think about, yeah, also using existing data as a starting point. So that would be one thing I would consider. The second thing is maybe already fast forward to think about the strategy you want to follow on qualitative research. We like to call it qual at scale data. With that, we mean not only just fast and cheaply AI generated data. I think it's really thick data. So data that are multidimensional, that have the necessary depth. Because more and more evidence shows that having access to those kind of data and keep those data, think about building up the knowledge on those data, is really a bit the new gold when it comes to synthetic data. I think longitudinal data there are ideal. So there, for example, methodologies like insights communities, just as an example, I at Humanate, I think most of you know we do a lot of them, but I think they're quite ideal because typically there you have a group of engaged people who stay in your community for a longer period of time and have agreed to take part in your research. It's that walled garden, and in that sense, yeah, it's quite a good data source to generate anything synthetic on, because you have the longitudinal dimension, but also the ability to ask really rich questions, not just about the individual, also about their social context, their culture surrounding them, and context. So I think that's one way. Another example I can share is that sometimes it's not just about research data to have quality scale data. It can also be any way of structural consumer collaboration. For example, one of the things we often do is just consumer closeness sessions with participants and basically people working for a brand. These are just like natural conversations that happen between brands and people, and just having tracks of this data, this human stories, can be a really good way again to feed your digital twins. So I think it's an invitation maybe for all of you to think about like what could be your strategy behind that, how could I work with that, and so on. So that's, I think I would say, if you're still a bit maybe unsure about this area, maybe say synthetic data, not yet for us. Well, two pieces of advice: existing data, and I think thinking about quality scale data building and so on. But of course, if you want to give it a go, there's already things you can do as well, I think, if you are ready for it. In terms of approach there, my advice would be, yeah, to be thoughtful of considering two dimensions. I think the first one is like, what's the method you want to use? I think AI avatars are fairly more established than they used to be a few months ago. I think digital twins are still in the beginning. My only advice would be to stay away of any tools or approaches which are purely just using sample description. With that, I mean, I hope I made clear in also some of the context I've provided you and studies on synthetic data that it's really rich multidimensional data you need to be looking for. And if you use a tool which basically just allows us to say like the name of a target group, like I'm looking for male under 25 who have cookies for breakfast as an example, that will give you not the riches you need. And actually you will generate something believable, but it will not be reliable nor representative for what you're trying to reach. So that's where I would stay out. I think the other dimension, which is really important, is also to decide how do you want to use it. And I'll get a bit more into use cases in a minute, but important to take into consideration, is it more using any of this as an activation tool? So kind of bringing to life, maybe based on existing research, or how far do I want to go in like simulating new things? So that balance. And of course, what we see is the more advanced you go, the more depth you add, more closer, for example, to the digital twins, the more evidence there is that you can go much further into simulation and decision making. I think also if you go for more low effort approaches, it can still be really valuable, but then probably it's more internal activation rather than really simulation. Um, the most important thing I think in any approach, and this is also why we called this webinar In Search of Soul, is that you really are looking for data with soul. So really this qualitative data that are the base of, I would say, your synthetic data, multidimensional, that give that depth, and therefore also can bring that quality. And I think it's important, if you go that route, that you pay as much attention, not just in creating the synthetic data, but also educating anybody in your organization how to use and interact with them. I think for an end user especially, it can be very complex, I would say, to kind of consider, I would say, like what's behind it, because it looks really real, right? And it looks very believable. So educating your organization on when to use it, not to use it, is important. When looking also to get started, there's definitely a couple of critical questions I would advise you to look at. I think the first one is like, anybody you're working with, are they transparent on how the synthetic data have been generated, or they're open on, what's your landscape and your prompts, because there's so many variables to take into account. Have they done any research on for which type of research can you and can you not trust the data? Do they have any advice maybe on that spectrum of activation versus decision making? And then finally, of course, also has the synthetic data be generated with necessary consents in place, especially when real people are at the base. So where to use or when to use then synthetic data, if you would go, for example, for the avatar approach. I promise still some use cases. So the first one would be definitely in the activation space, to increase the lifetime of insights. It's a great way to kind of make sure that there's this longevity of private previous investments you have done in research. Ideal also to do a quick sense early onwards. I always compare it, let's say I'm making a concept board, or any kind of thought I have in terms of marketing stimuli or ID. You can use it as a quick sounding board just to kind of test your thinking, and then continue. Not necessarily as a replacement of the real research. Selection and prioritization. I think another great use case, especially in this age of AI, where it's so easy, or so much easier than before, to generate stimuli. I think, for example, just the world of advertisement. If we in the past wanted to do any research with advertisement, sometimes you had to wait weeks just to get the ad, right? Whereas now, with generative AI, maybe you have 3, 4, 5 versions, and a pre-selection needs to happen on what you want to text. So selection and prioritization, key. Any low risk decisions, I think that's where you can more confidently go into decision making. Think of maybe your tier three markets, maybe the brand, the B brand, that normally you don't have budget for, but you still want to use like some consumer voice to kind of test some of things. That can be a good one. Hard to reach target groups. I think a classic one for synthetic data, all forms of synthetic data. But I think in a world where diversity is so important, just to amplify some of the voices that maybe are harder to find in your primary research, or to engage in research studies as a whole. And then last but not least, I think aligning cross-functional teams. I think what we see is with our avatars that it can be a great way to just have this like as a bit of a north star in your organization, to say like, hey, this is the persona we have in mind. We're all chatting with the same type of data. We're taking the same decisions with the same kind of key persona in mind. So that can be a great way. Think of marketing and digital teams and so on. So we're almost at the end. I just want to still wrap up by sharing with you who was the real participant. We will see if A or B were correct. So yeah, people that guessed B or were correct, that was the real participant. As you might remember, yes, the B's can shout again. Yeah. Of course, uh, it was a difficult task, and I think that that's also the point, at least I've been trying to make in the last half hour. It can be very believable, but it's not necessarily real. And I think also, I hope I was able to kind of show you where we are already on the journey, I think, to more synthetic data. No, I just want to wrap up with, yeah, kind of, I guess, a bit more of a philosophical question. But one of the things I'm often asked to is like, is this the end? Will synthetic data become so good that it will actually replace primary research? And if you look at this example, right, it looks really real. Actually, some studies show really high correlations. So you kind of wonder, like, is this the end of classic primary research? Well, I hope I was able also to illustrate you that I think it's a new beginning, and a new beginning because of two reasons. Yes, synthetic data will become better to simulate real answers. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, all evidence shows that you need deep primary qualitative data to build the synthetic data. So actually, it's really a bit of a circular process. Yes, you might be quick just to check some things with your AI avatars and your twins, but to keep them up to date, you will need to keep them feeding with deep qualitative research, actually, yeah, to make sure they're reliable and valid. So it's not the end. It is a new beginning of thinking, and definitely also, and I think this is true in general, a little bit of a goodbye to the classic linear process that we've been following a lot. I think the approach where you say, I get a brief, let's collect some existing data, some new data, and just, yeah, get some recommendations. Increasingly, already what we're seeing, I think, with AI, you recycle what's already there. You start from what's already known, so you really can focus, like in your primary research, on uncovering those deeper things. And synthetic data will only amplify that, right? Because it will help you to simulate already upfront the answers. And yes, you'll still do primary, but maybe more selective, or more, I think, foundational, to feed synthetic data moving forward. So hope that was helpful, and yeah, looking forward to hear any questions or reactions on what we said.
Yes, thank you very much, Annelie. I'm generally really surprised of how many people got the real participant right. Thank you everyone for joining today. So obviously it's a very novel and intriguing topic. There's a lot of information to digest. Don't worry, as I said before, so you will receive the recording after the session. Also, you will receive a feedback survey after the session. Um, and yeah, but let's have a look. Maybe I'm not sure whether there was actually a question submitted. I see some things in the chat. Are there any questions here? Oh yeah, there are some questions. And oh, yeah, I see there's a question. How much data is really needed to create synthetic data? So for example, an avatar, one study, 1,000 of studies, And that question comes from Veronica.
Yes, yes, good question. Very good question. So, and of course, yeah, I think as you can imagine, there's no clear-cut answer. Like I can say, like 1,000 data points are sufficient. I think there's two important questions to consider. That's the term that I mentioned. I think one is, what do you want to use it for? Is it more activation? Then actually you can, yeah, have sufficient to have less data. Sometimes we do it maybe on one big study. And then I think for an activation purpose, that might be enough. However, if you want to use it more for simulation, then we definitely yeah, think there's more data needed. It's not necessarily the size of the data. So this is not about big data. It's about thick data. So for example, if you want to simulate something, let's say about, I don't know, let's say made a journey, and you don't have any previous data on journey mapping or anything in that, then that will be hard to do any simulations on. So it's really more on like, what is that you want to simulate? And then what data do you have to back up that simulation? I think that's the main idea. So that is also why if you go more into simulations, we typically help by looking at like, what data are we going to use as a base? Do we have enough? What reliability can we have with the existing data, and so on.
Okay. There's another question, and that comes from Anna Marie. And I think that's more about like some clarification. So she says, if I understood correctly, one of the places to use synthetic data could be where you don't have as much diversity in data. Assuming I understood that use case, wouldn't that be somewhere where the synthetic data isn't so robust, or have I misunderstood something?
Yeah, no, it's a very, very good question. And I think there's two answers on it. I think the first thing you need to be just aware of that if you're using any just normal plain GPT approach to synthetic data, so that means like you go, for example, to GPT or any large language model, can be Claude or Gemini, doesn't matter, and you're asking any question, is that that is not trained on any AI avatar. So then you will have biases like you saw it in the graph, which are inherently built into large language models because they're trained generally, let's say, on the internet, and some voices are not as much heard on the internet. Also, socials, often polarization, very extreme opinions that you're having, and so on. For the avatars, I do think you can use it to amplify certain voices because in that case, you're actually, let's say, narrowing, I'm getting a bit technical, but narrowing your prompts down, representing a certain target group. And in that case, it can be a way, for example, to say maybe a minority group or a specific segment, hard to reach segments, maybe an expensive segment to do research with. It can be a way to simulate the data. It's always going to be a simulation. So I think that's also where it's important. The more data you're adding to backup and the more dimensions you're adding to backup your simulation, the more accurate and the less bias you will have. That's the general, I would say, vision. Of course, yeah, it's still early days. I think that's also just fair to say.
All right. Um, I don't think there are any more questions here. Let me just see if there's no more question. Yeah, I see people are typing in the chat, so I need to open here, but I think it's just a lot of thank yous. So yeah, with that being said, I think we can close now. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening and joining today. Thank you, thank you. Yeah. um. All right. Okay.
Good. Thank you all for joining also on my end. And yeah, I'm looking forward, of course, also if anybody would be interested to continue the conversation. I hope you see we're quite passionate about the topic. So happy to exchange thoughts further long word. Thank you for joining today.